First contact with the algorithm. Dr. Sarah Chen stared at the holographic display floating above her desk in the Ganymede Research Station, her eyes reflecting the soft blue glow of countless mathematical formulas. The message from the Galactic Mathematical Council couldn't have been clearer or more condescending. While we appreciate Earth's enthusiasm, the computational principles underlying the quantum processing network are beyond current human cognitive capabilities. She had spent the last 3 years studying the aliens' prized QPN, the system that governed everything from interstellar navigation to planetary climate control. The Arctians, with their crystalline bodies and minds that operated on quantum principles, had introduced it to humanity as a gift, or so they claimed. But Sarah had found something in the equations that bothered her, a peculiar recursive pattern that shouldn't exist in a truly quantum system. Dr. Chen, your morning briefing starts in 10 minutes. The station's eye reminded her. Sarah nodded, but didn't move. Her fingers traced invisible patterns in the air as she manipulated the holographic equations. The Arctians' mathematics was beautiful, she had to admit. Their ability to process multiple quantum states simultaneously had led to computational advances that had transformed the galaxy. But there was something fundamentally wrong with their approach. The pattern repeats, she muttered to herself. It shouldn't repeat. In pure quantum computation, patterns were supposed to be truly random. Yet here they were, subtle but unmistakable fractals appearing in what should have been chaos. The door to her office slid open with a soft hiss. Dr. Katri, her department head, stepped in. Sarah, the Arctian delegation is waiting. Please tell me you're not still pursuing this theory of yours. Sarah turned to face him, her expression set with determination. It's not just a theory anymore, Raj. Look at this. She gestured at the display, highlighting a sequence of numbers. The QPN isn't purely quantum at all. It's a hybrid system, and they either don't realize it or they're not telling us. Katri sighed, his dark eyes reflecting concern. The Arctians have been developing quantum computing for millennia. Their mathematical proofs are accepted across 17 galactic sectors. Do you really think you found something they missed? That's exactly the problem, Sarah said, standing up. They've been doing it their way for so long. They can't see the flaws. Their minds work differently than ours. They think in quantum states naturally. But we don't. We had to learn to think about quantum mechanics from a classical starting point, and that gives us a perspective they lack. She pulled up another display, this one showing the results of her simulations. Look at these error rates. They're not random. There's a pattern to them. And if I'm right, it means the entire QPN is vulnerable to cascade failures under certain conditions. Katri studied the numbers, his expression gradually shifting from skepticism to concern. Even if you're right, and I'm not saying you are, the Arctians will never accept this from a human. You know how they view us. We're barely more than clever primates to them. Sarah smiled, a glint of determination in her eyes. Then maybe it's time they learned that clever primates can sometimes see things that quantum minds miss. I'm presenting my findings at the briefing. They'll dismiss it outright, Chatri warned. The Arctian chief mathematician has more computing power in a single crystal than our entire station. Computing power isn't everything, Sarah said, gathering her data tablets. Sometimes you need to step back and see the bigger picture. That's something we humans are particularly good at. As they walked to the briefing room, Sarah could feel her heart pounding. She knew what was coming. The dismissive looks, the patronizing explanations of why she must be wrong, the subtle suggestions that human mathematics was too primitive to understand their advanced systems. But she also knew she was right. The briefing room doors opened to reveal the Arctian delegation, their crystalline forms refracting the room's light into rainbow patterns across the walls. Chief mathematician Zurich turned all 7 of his sensory clusters toward her, his crystalline structure humming with barely contained disdain. Dr. Chen, he resonated, his translator converting the complex harmonics into English. I trust you have reconsidered your interesting hypotheses about our computational networks. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped forward. Actually, Chief Mathematician, I've confirmed them, and I can prove it. She activated her presentation, filling the room with holographic equations. The QPN isn't just flawed, it's fundamentally misconstructed, and I can show you exactly why. The crystals making up Xerx's form vibrated with what might have been amusement or annoyance. It was hard to tell with Arctions. Proceed, he resonated, though I must remind you that the mathematical principles involved are quite beyond human comprehension. Sarah interrupted, allowing herself a small smile. That's exactly what I want to talk about, because I think you'll find that human comprehension might be exactly what your network needs. The equations began to flow across the room, and Sarah Chen prepared to challenge everything the galaxy thought it knew about quantum computation and about human capabilities. The challenge. The Grand Hall of Computation on New Delta Centauri was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. Quantum crystals lined the walls, each one containing more processing power than Earth's most advanced supercomputers. The assembled aliens, Arctions, Vex, Quantari, and dozens of other species sat in tiered rows that rose hundreds of meters into the air, their varied forms all focused on the central platform where the challenge would take place. The human insists on participating. The question came from First Calculator X of the Vex, their bioelectric form flickering with what might have been amusement. This is a waste of the Council's time. The rules are clear, Xerx resonated, his crystalline form still vibrating from the journey through quantum space. Any sentient species may attempt the challenge, even ones with limited computational capacity. Sarah stood at her designated station, trying to ignore the murmurs and electromagnetic pulses of doubt radiating from the audience. The past week had been a blur of preparations and arguments. After her presentation on Ganymede, the Arctions had been forced to acknowledge that she might have identified a potential anomaly in their network. But rather than seriously consider her findings, they had issued a challenge. The parameters are simple, announced the Master of Ceremonies, a quantary whose multidimensional form hurt Sarah's eyes to look at directly. Each participant will be presented with a series of increasingly complex quantum mathematical problems. These problems must be solved in real time, without the assistance of external computing devices. The final challenge will involve predicting the collapse state of a 1,000,000-qubit system. Sarah heard Catri's voice in her earpiece. Sarah, are you sure about this? No human has ever even attempted to process calculations at this scale. That's because they're all trying to think like quantum computers, she subvocalized. But that's not what I'm going to do. The first round began. Holographic displays materialized around each participant, showing complex wave functions and probability matrices. The alien competitors, all of them enhanced with various forms of quantum-capable neural interfaces, began their calculations immediately. Their responses appeared almost instantly on the main display, each one perfectly precise. Sarah took her time, studying the patterns. She could feel the impatience radiating from the audience. To them, her slow, methodical approach probably looked like primitive struggling. They didn't understand that she wasn't trying to compute the answers. She was looking for something else entirely. Human competitor Chen has yet to submit a response for the first equation, the Master of Ceremonies announced, a reminder that each challenge has a time limit. Sarah's first answer appeared on the screen. The hall fell silent. This is correct, the Master said, all four of their probability states showing surprise. But the method used appears to be irregular. Impossible. First Calculator X flickered. The human is using some form of hidden assistance. No, Xerx resonated, his crystalline form analyzing the data patterns. The methodology is, I don't understand it. This isn't quantum computation at all. Sarah moved on to the second problem, then the third. Each time, her answers came more slowly than her competitors, but each one was perfect. And more importantly, each solution revealed a little more of what she had discovered about the fundamental nature of the QPN. By the fifth round, half the alien competitors had withdrawn, their quantum-enhanced minds unable to process what they were seeing. Sarah's solutions weren't just correct. They were elegant in a way that defied their understanding of mathematics. "This competition is invalid," Angst declared, their bioelectric field crackling with agitation. "The human is not performing quantum calculations. She is using some other method." "Yes," Sarah said, speaking up for the first time since the challenge began. I'm using human mathematics, and if you'll let me show you why, I think you'll understand that your entire quantum processing network needs to be reconsidered." The hall erupted in a chaos of protests, electromagnetic pulses, and quantum fluctuations, but Sarah noticed that Xerix had gone very still, his crystalline structure resonating at a frequency she had never seen before. "Proceed," he said finally, overriding the objections of the other council members. "Show us what you see." Sarah took a deep breath and began to explain. She had known from the start that winning the challenge wasn't enough. She had to make them understand why their entire approach to quantum computation needed to change. And more importantly, why the combined insights of human and alien mathematics might be the key to something far greater than either of them had achieved alone. Hidden patterns. The holographic display in the Grand Hall shifted as Sarah input her commands, transforming the quantum equations into something entirely different. Instead of the traditional probability waves and quantum states, she showed them what she saw: patterns within patterns, a hidden architecture beneath the quantum foam. "Your quantum processing network isn't purely quantum at all," she explained, her voice steady despite the pressure of thousands of alien minds focused on her. "It's a hybrid system, but not in the way you think. Look at these recursion patterns." The display zoomed in on a particular sequence of calculations, one that had been running through the QPN for centuries. To quantum minds, it appeared random, exactly as it should. But Sarah highlighted something else: a subtle fractal-like structure that emerged when viewed from a classical mathematical perspective. "Impossible," one of the quantary judges whispered, their multidimensional form fluctuating in distress. "Quantum systems cannot produce predictable patterns." "Exactly," Sarah said, allowing herself a small smile. "Which means your network isn't operating the way you think it is. The quantum states aren't fully collapsing. They're falling into subtle resonance patterns, patterns that your quantum-oriented minds are literally incapable of perceiving." Xerix's crystalline form vibrated at an unusual frequency as he studied the display. "But our calculations, our entire civilization relies on the quantum purity of these systems." "And they work," Sarah acknowledged, "but not because of quantum computation. They work because you accidentally created something far more interesting, a system that operates in the space between quantum and classical states, a third type of computation that no one recognized because everyone was too focused on the quantum aspects." She brought up another display, this one showing the results of her own research. "Human minds develop differently than most space-faring species. We don't naturally think in quantum states. We had to learn to understand them from a classical starting point. That gave us a unique perspective, the ability to see patterns that quantum-native species might miss." The hall had gone completely silent. Even the usually chattering Vex were still, their bioelectric fields dimmed in concentration. "Watch what happens when I apply this understanding to your network," Sarah continued. She input a series of commands, and the holographic display transformed again. The quantum equations remained, but now they were overlaid with a new pattern, a mathematical structure that seemed to exist in the spaces between the quantum states. "This is why I could solve those challenge problems," she explained. "I wasn't trying to compute the quantum states directly. I was reading the patterns they created, predicting where they would stabilize. It's like reading the wake of a boat to know where it's going, instead of tracking the boat itself." First calculator inks flickered rapidly, their bioelectric field showing signs of intense processing. "But this would mean Our entire understanding of computational theory needs to be reconsidered. Sarah finished, but not abandoned. What you've built works. It just works for different reasons than you thought. And if we combine our understanding of quantum systems with human pattern recognition, we could create something far more powerful than either approach alone. Xerix moved closer to the display, his crystalline structure analyzing the patterns Sarah had revealed. In all our millennia of development, how did we not see this? Because you were looking too closely, Sarah said. Sometimes you need to step back to see the whole picture. Humans aren't better at math than other species. We're just better at seeing patterns in chaos. It's how we survived on Earth before we had any technology at all. She manipulated the display one more time, showing a simulation of what could be achieved by deliberately engineering the hybrid state she had discovered. The possibilities unfolded before them. Computational systems that combine the speed of quantum processing with the pattern recognition of classical mathematics, networks that could solve problems neither approach could handle alone. This isn't just about fixing a flaw in your network, Sarah said, her voice growing passionate. This is about combining our different ways of thinking to create something new, something that could revolutionize everything from space travel to medical science. The implications were beginning to sink in across the hall. Species that had long looked down on human mathematics were seeing something they had never expected, not just competence, but insight that had eluded their most advanced minds. Breaking the system. The next few hours in the Grand Hall of Computation transformed into an impromptu symposium as Sarah demonstrated the practical applications of her discovery. The alien mathematicians, their initial skepticism giving way to intense curiosity, crowded around her terminal, each bringing their own unique perspective to this revolutionary understanding. If what you're showing us is correct, Enk said, their bioelectric field pulsing with excitement rather than disdain now, then the computational limitations we've accepted for generations were self-imposed. We've been thinking in quantum absolutes when we should have been looking for quantum patterns. Sarah nodded, pulling up a new simulation. Watch what happens when we deliberately engineer these hybrid states instead of trying to eliminate them. She input a series of commands, and the holographic display erupted with a cascade of calculations that made even the quantum-minded aliens step back in surprise. This is impossible, one of the Vex scientists declared, but their tone was wondering rather than dismissive. The processing speed is beyond anything our current systems can achieve. Because it's not just processing, Sarah explained, her fingers dancing across the interface. It's predicting. Traditional quantum computing tries to maintain pure states until the final calculation. But what if instead we let the system fall into these natural patterns? Look at how the information flows. The display showed a simulation of data moving through the modified network. Instead of the usual quantum fluctuations, the information seemed to find natural channels, flowing like water finding the path of least resistance. It's beautiful, Xerix resonated, his crystalline structure vibrating in harmony with the display. But the implications, our entire network would need to be reconfigured. The disruption to galactic communications alone would be minimal. Sarah interrupted, bringing up another simulation. Because we can implement these changes gradually. The network already naturally falls into these patterns. We just need to stop fighting them. Look. She highlighted a section of the existing QPN, showing how it was already exhibiting the hybrid behavior she had identified. The alien mathematicians gathered closer, their various sensory organs and computational interfaces working overtime to process what they were seeing. Sarah could almost feel the moment when understanding began to spread through the hall like a wave. But this means. First, calculator X's form flickered rapidly as they processed the implications. This means that human mathematical intuition, what we dismissed as primitive pattern matching, is exactly what we needed, Xerix finished, his crystalline form resonating with what might have been embarrassment. We were so focused on pure quantum states that we couldn't see the larger patterns emerging from the system itself. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Sometimes the best view comes from standing at a distance. Humans had to learn to understand quantum mechanics from the outside in. We couldn't take it for granted like species that naturally think in quantum states. That gave us a perspective you couldn't have. One of the younger Arxians, their crystal structures still showing signs of recent growth, moved forward. Could you show us how you see these patterns? Not just the mathematical representation, but how a human mind perceives them. Sarah paused, considering the request. It was one thing to demonstrate the mathematical principles, but explaining human intuition to quantum-minded aliens. Then she had an idea. "Let me show you something," she said, clearing the display and starting fresh. "This is how humans first learned to understand patterns in nature, long before we had any advanced technology." She began to draw simple geometric shapes, then showed how they appeared in everything from seashells to galaxy formations. "We survived on Earth by recognizing patterns," she continued, "predicting weather from cloud formations, tracking animals by their movements, understanding the cycles of seasons. Our brains evolved to see connections everywhere, even sometimes where they don't exist. But that same ability lets us see real patterns that might be invisible to minds that process information differently." The aliens watched, fascinated, as Sarah demonstrated how human pattern recognition could be applied to quantum systems. She showed them how what looked like random quantum noise to their sensors actually contained subtle regularities that human minds could intuitively grasp. Redefining intelligence. 3 months after the challenge, the Ganymede Research Station had become the unlikely center of a galactic revolution in computational theory. The large observation dome, usually reserved for stellar research, had been converted into a collaborative workspace where humans and aliens worked side by side, combining their different approaches to mathematics and computation. Sarah stood at her familiar workstation, but now she was surrounded by a diverse group of beings. Xerx's crystalline form refracted light across her displays as he analyzed data through his quantum senses. Anx's bioelectric field hummed in harmony with the station's power systems as they processed results. Even the Quantary had sent their brightest minds, their multidimensional forms carefully contained to avoid disturbing the local spacetime. "The latest test results are remarkable," Xerx resonated, his tone carrying none of its former condescension. "By implementing your hybrid processing principles, we've increased network efficiency by 300% while reducing quantum decoherence by 78%. And that's just the beginning," Sarah said, pulling up a new set of projections. "Look at these pattern manifestations in the deep space relays. The network isn't just processing faster, it's beginning to anticipate data flows before they occur. Like human intuition," Anx observed, their field flickering with understanding. "The system is learning to recognize patterns just as your species does." Sarah nodded, feeling a deep satisfaction. The past months had seen a complete transformation in how the galactic community viewed human mathematics. What they had once dismissed as primitive had become the key to unlocking the next generation of computational theory. "We've received requests from 17 different sectors to establish similar research centers," Chatri announced, entering the dome with a stack of data tablets. "The Arxian Science Council is formally requesting that Earth establish a permanent seat on the Galactic Mathematical Forum." "About time," one of the younger Arxians chimed in, their crystals resonating with what Sarah had learned to recognize as amusement. "Though I suppose we can't blame our elders too much for their blindness. Sometimes the hardest patterns to recognize are the ones in our own thinking." Sarah smiled, remembering the skepticism she'd faced just a few months ago. "The real breakthrough wasn't just in the mathematics," she said, looking around at her alien colleagues. "It was learning to see value in different ways of thinking. Every species in this room processes information differently, and that diversity is our greatest strength." She brought up the latest model of the enhanced network, showing how the combined insights of multiple species had created something far more powerful than any one approach could have achieved. The display showed data flowing through the system in ways that looked almost organic, following patterns that were neither purely quantum nor purely classical, but something wonderfully new. "We've done more than fix a flaw in the network," Xerix observed, his crystalline structure harmonizing with the display. We've created a new kind of mathematics, one that draws on the strengths of all our species. And we're just getting started, Sarah said, her eyes bright with possibilities. Think about it. If combining human pattern recognition with quantum processing could lead to this, what might we discover by incorporating other species' unique cognitive abilities? The Vex's temporal perception, the Quantaries' multidimensional modeling. A true galactic mathematics, Anx finished, their bioelectric field pulsing with excitement. Not dominated by any one species' way of thinking, but enriched by all of them. As Sarah looked out at the stars through the dome's transparent sections, she couldn't help but smile. Humanity had finally found its place in the galactic community, not by trying to mimic alien thinking, but by offering their own unique perspective. The universe, they were discovering, was vast enough for many kinds of intelligence, many ways of seeing and understanding. Dr. Chen, one of the station's AIs, announced, the first group of student exchanges has arrived. We have young mathematicians from 12 species ready to begin the new collaborative program. Sarah straightened her uniform and turned toward the door. It was time to teach the next generation, human and alien alike, that true intelligence wasn't about processing speed or quantum states. It was about seeing patterns, making connections, and most importantly, being willing to learn from minds very different from your own. Send them in, she said. We have a universe of patterns to explore together.